one of the stumbling blocks to people's belief in the Bible is a modern, humanistic, materialistic worldview that says that science can explain the world around us, and that the Bible is thousands of years old, and that ancient peoples relied on superstition, myths, and legends in order to explain the things that were happening to them and explain their origin. And of course, it would be natural for people to wonder, why am I here? And to wonder if I have a purpose in my life. And also, they needed explanations for natural events like earthquakes and floods and the various things that can happen to people, moral dilemmas. And so, this materialistic, humanistic worldview would say that these people simply made up stories in order to satisfy their desire to know these things. But we don't have to do that today, because today we have science, and we have telescopes, we have computers, we have mathematical formulas and theory. And so today we can look at the world and we can explain it ourselves simply through our power of observation. Now, is that true? Is the Bible, and in particular today I want to look at the book of Genesis and the creation account, is that a myth and a legend? Is there any truth to the book of Genesis? How does the book of Genesis stack up and compare with modern scientific theory? Well, I'd like to examine both. I'd like to put the Bible up for scrutiny, and it should be up for scrutiny. If we're going to believe in something, it needs to withstand a hard look at. And I say, let's take a look at it. But let's also look at modern scientific theory. And we'll look at where the two disagree, and do they actually agree in any way. So that's something I'd like to examine. Okay, let's take a look at what the Big Bang Theory says. I'm reading from BigBangTheory.com. It says, Big Bang Theory, the premise. The Big Bang Theory is an effort to explain what happened at the very beginning of our universe. Discoveries in astronomy and physics have shown beyond a reasonable doubt that our universe did in fact have a beginning. Prior to that moment, there was nothing. During and after that moment, there was something, our universe. And so we can see that modern science has concluded, after decades of observations, research, testing. As a matter of fact, it says in this particular website about the Big Bang Theory that it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the universe had a beginning, and that it started with nothing, and that nothing became something. Okay, I'm looking at the King James Online Bible, and it says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Well, that's sort of saying that there was a beginning to the universe, and that there was nothing, and then there was something. No, that can't be. That's silly. That's obviously a superstition and a legend, and in total disagreement with modern science. Okay, let's take a look at Genesis 1:1 again. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light, that it was good. Okay, we can see from Genesis 1 that it says, after the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it said darkness was over the face of the deep, and then God said, let there be light, and suddenly the light came on. Now, how does this compare with the Big Bang Theory? Okay, I'm going to read from space.com. It's a website that talks about the Big Bang. And it says the first second in the birth of light. In the first second after the universe began, the surrounding temperature was about 10 billion degrees Fahrenheit, 5.5 billion Celsius, according to NASA. The cosmos contained a vast array of fundamental particles such as neutrons, electrons, and protons. These decayed or combined as the universe got cooler. This early soup would have been impossible to look at because light could not carry inside of it. The free electrons would have caused light, photons, to scatter the way sunlight scatters from the water droplets in clouds, NASA stated. Over time, however, the free electrons met up with nuclei and created neutral atoms. This allowed the light to shine through about 380,000 years after the Big Bang. This early light, sometimes called the afterglow of the Big Bang, is more properly known as the cosmic microwave background. It was first predicted by Ralph Alpher and other scientists in 1948, but was found only by accident almost 20 years later. Okay, if I could sum this up, it looks like so far Genesis 1:1 says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, and that there was darkness over the face of the deep, and during this there was this period of darkness until God said, "Let there be light," and then suddenly the light was turned on. And once again, this light was not from celestial bodies or stars because they hadn't formed yet. And that's the Genesis account. All right, what does the Big Bang say? Big Bang says there was a beginning, that there was nothing, the nothing became something, and there was a period of darkness, and then suddenly, or I say suddenly, they say after a period of time, the light came on. Okay? So, if the Bible in Genesis 1 is superstition, it kind of sounds like the Big Bang is sort of saying the same thing happened. Now, you may be thinking that there's an elephant in the room that I'm trying to avoid. And that elephant in the room is time. Because the Big Bang Theory does indeed say that the universe had a beginning, that it came from nothing, and that there was a period of darkness. And during that period of darkness, there was no light to be seen. And then the light came on. But the Big Bang Theory says that that happened over a period of 380,000 years. Now, the Bible in Genesis 1:1 says that that happened in less than a day. Or does it say that? Let's look into that. Okay, and then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Okay, so what length of time did it take from in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth, until the end of the first day? Well, I think it all depends what viewpoint you're looking at it. One of the strange ideas of Einstein's theory of relativity is the concept of time dilation. Time dilation says time elapses and is measured differently by two observers relative to their velocity in space and relative to their position in a gravitational field. We've all heard of the thought experiment that talks about an astronaut who would get on a spaceship and leave Earth and travel at the speed of light, or near the speed of light, at to some distant place, and he would spend a year and then return home, and for him, a year would have transpired, but he would have found when he got back that hundreds of years would have passed on Earth. And that's because time passed differently uh, for the two because they were traveling at different velocities. And this same concept would go for a black hole. If a person was on the edge of a black hole, from the viewpoint of someone who was away from the black hole and away from that gravitational field, the person at the edge of the black hole would appear to be motionless, as if time had stopped for him. And yet, that to that person on the edge of the black hole, time would appear to be normal, if you could survive being near the edge of a black hole. But this is another thought experiment. And if the person at the edge of the black hole would look at the observer that's away from that gravitational field, they would seem to be moving at super fast speeds, and time would be passing quite differently for them. It also says that for a photon traveling through a vacuum in space, time would not elapse at all. That if it were possible to be an observer from the viewpoint of a photon traveling through a vacuum, no matter how far you went or what distance you traveled, from that vantage point of an observer, it would seem that you got everywhere instantly. And so we know that time passes different depending on the frame of reference of the observer. So let's go back to the creation and the beginning. And we take the events that happened from the creation until the light first came on. Who was the observer? Well, the only observer there could have been would be God, because if you believe the materialistic viewpoint, there would be no observer. And from the Genesis account says the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, and so the only observer would have been God. And so what frame of reference would God have been in as an observer? So how would time have passed for him under that circumstances? Now, of course, some people believe, rightly so, that God is outside of space-time. He was a being from outside of the universe and would be outside of space-time altogether, and that he's in a timeless place. So how much time passed for God during that period? Well, I say it took as much time as it took for God to do it, as much time as he wanted it to take. Now, the scientists say it was 380,000 years before the light turned on. It's a long time. But years from whose vantage point? The vantage point of this Earth at traveling at our velocity and our gravitational field, which was totally different at that time. Remember, the circumstances of the early universe was of a singularity, according to the Big Bang, that expanded. Was space different? And can we even use any time references from our own modern years and trips around the sun, and from our observable viewpoint, is that even relevant in this circumstances? Because I believe space-time would have been totally different in what was a different universe. So let's look at the Big Bang. There were no observers to the Big Bang, nor could there have been. The time frame of an observer to the Big Bang event, there's no answer because there were no observers. And according to the Big Bang theory, they surmise that from the initial Big Bang until first light was visible was approximately 380,000 years. Now let's compare the Genesis account. Genesis says there was an observer, God. The time frame of the observer, God, was timeless because God originates outside this universe, and so the space time from within this universe would not apply to him. And from the moment of creation until first light was visible occurred in during the first day in the time frame of God. So this is where we have a contradiction. Big Bang, pretty clear. 380,000 years until first light. Genesis, part of first day from creation until first light. So which one is correct? Well, is it possible they're both correct? So I'm going to make the following proposition to you. If I was a photon traveling at the speed of light in a vacuum during this time period, that zero time would have elapsed for me. It all would have happened instantly. That if somehow I could have traveled back in time and been a space observer in a spaceship and I was in the midst of this, that I would observe 380,000 years of time. But if I'm God, who originates outside of this universe and is not under the space-time restraints of being a part of this universe, that from my observational standpoint, only a portion of a day would have passed. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Hopefully I'll be able to follow this up with a part 2 video. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the same observations that have led modern scientists who look at this from a materialistic, humanistic viewpoint, that have led them to believe in a Big Bang theory as the origin of the universe, that same evidence and those same observations support the Genesis creation account. Now, the Genesis creation account does not provide detail, but all the same premises are there. So it's simply a matter of what worldview do you approach it from.